Our first session today is Design and Interventions. Papers in this session will address a range of design interventions as well as implications for the design profession more broadly, including questions of how and where the work of design and construction currently happens, who and what it serves, and how the systems of recognition for architectural practice can and should be rethought. As with the response to other urban and public health crises, the design profession has been called upon to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. This has led to innovative design solutions to accommodate new cultural and social practices, yet also has put into stark relief the inadequacies of many urban design, housing, and workplace solutions that previously felt routine. Through this critical lens, the presentations in this session will explore the design, implementation, and experience of design and construction interventions to cope with COVID-19 and its impacts, the future of design technologies, construction practices, and of architectural practice, and short and long-term impacts of social distancing and teleworking on urban development and architectural design. Dr. Luisa Urochi will be moderating this session. Dr. Urochi is an associate professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Washington in Seattle. She's a licensed architect who has worked in architectural firms in Toronto, New York, and Cambridge. She's the author of The Urban Department Store in America from Ashgate in 2014, and editor of Visual Merchandising, The Image of Selling from Ashgate in 2013. Her research focuses on the forms and operations of the material artifacts of the city with a focus on commerce, storage, and health.
Hello, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to Caitlin and Mohammed for inviting me to be part of this important event. This morning's session on design and intervention includes 4 papers from speakers from 4 countries from diverse perspectives. So I'm very excited and anxious to get started. Our first speaker is Elizabeth Walder. She is a visiting lecturer in architecture at the Wales Institute of Science and Art at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. She obtained her PhD in architecture from the University of Liverpool School of Architecture. Her publications focus mainly on recognition within the architectural profession and issues surrounding gender. In March 2020, she contributed to an online international ebook entitled Surviving the Coronavirus Lockdown and Social Isolation. Her paper today is entitled The Fall of Starchitecture and the Future of Architectural Practice in the Post-COVID UK.
The arrival and impact of COVID in the UK has necessitated the rethinking of the workplace for the architecture studio with reference to both the creative mind and the practical delivery of design. In addition, COVID has impacted the recognition system within the UK, and in doing so, I believe has woken up the establishment to understand that the time for change is now. Tomorrow will be too late. Within the architectural profession, we have this phenomenon, starchitecture or star architecture, architects at the top end who are predominantly white and male. Ask any student of architecture who they are influenced by, and they will name Corbusier, Mies, or Frank Lloyd Wright, all white, all male. Architecture may once have been seen as an elite profession, but it is now possible to challenge the status quo. For example, it took 6 years between electing the first female president of the RIBA for a female to win their highest accolade, the Royal Gold Medal. With other activists, I have spent the last few years pushing for a successful increase in female nominations for the International Architecture Prizes, resulting in wins for O'Donnell and Toomey in 2015, Zaha Hadid in 2016, and Grafton Architects last year. I think we are now in a similar situation with non-white architects. We currently sit within a radically aware society where controversy and anti-establishment are bedfellows. But international campaigns such as Black Lives Matter will eventually filter down to the architectural profession. Few non-white architects have been recognised. But in a future of professional change, anything is possible. In its 170-year history, the oldest architectural prize, the RIBA Royal Gold Medal, has only ever been awarded to 2 non-white individuals, and one of them is for this year, 2021. But in this period of turbulence, I question if we are giving the gold medals to the right people. David Adjaye did top the list of the UK's most influential black people in 2012, but his practice has been close to insolvency. Surely we should be recognising the achievements of someone like Mariam Kamara instead. A question to certainly think about. There is no doubt that the winds of change are blowing for recognition in the field. More women are being nominated, and I urge my fellow speakers and this audience to nominate younger and more non-white architects as well. Within practice, architects have been working hard to embrace the technology revolution. Large open plan design studios delivered complex projects using BIM, allowing us to work with our multidisciplinary colleagues. And small practices also adopted technologies such as WhatsApp as a project management tool. But then along came COVID. Overnight, teams became individuals and created their own home office, like mine in the 3rd bedroom, a tiny space under the stairs or in the shed at the bottom of the garden. We now use online meeting hubs to transfer knowledge and exchange best practice. And despite Norman Foster commenting that there is no substitute for face-to-face contact around a table, many practices are questioning whether their existing workspace will continue to be necessary. Ian Harris, the Managing Director of Maber, a large UK practice with 5 offices, anticipates that staff will operate on a 50-50 split between working from home and in the office in the longer term. Harris points out that with long-term leases already signed, making the spaces work in terms of rent may well mean inviting others to share it with us. Architects are in many ways traditionalists, trusting in what they know to work. Some practices can find it hard to react beyond the established routes of procurement, but those who are flexible enough to tip their toes into new market areas will quickly steal a march on the competition who are busy looking the other way. Darnton B3 Architecture, previously the house architect for Coca-Cola and Adidas in the UK, are now developing Home and Maker, an offshoot company that designs one-off and house extensions. The future of practice is to be flexible and versatile. This year in the UK, the project focus shifted onto unusual housing buildings, clever civic projects and small-scale structures such as these. Recognising that no significant new buildings were being designed, most architectural awards were cancelled. This is not the first time in history that cities and buildings will be redesigned in response to an increased understanding of disease. COVID-19 is speeding up development of all types of touchless technology, like automatic doors and hands-free light switches and temperature controls. Self-cleaning bathrooms could be the future for hotel design, as well as antibacterial fabrics and finishes being commonplace. The typical 3-bedroom house in the UK will be replaced by a 2-bedroom house and a dedicated home office space. Open plan living will be carved up into individual spaces, and as more people will be working from home, there will be a wider preoccupation with thermal comfort and energy efficiency. Architecture in the 21st century is now about raising awareness of climate change, rather than celebrating new materials or expanding the envelope of design. I want to leave you with this quote from Rami El-Samahi, a principal at Over Under in Boston. We need to embrace these dramatic changes taking place within the profession. Virtual working will fundamentally change the value proposition of shared workspace. Working alongside others, but not in the same physical space, will allow for a future balance of isolated concentration and productive, meaningful collaboration. We will be the same, but our approach must be different. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Our next speaker is Brilliant Mavima, who is a PhD student at the University of Zimbabwe. His focus is in urban design, planning systems, and computer-aided designing and modeling. He has been involved in various design and modeling projects for different local authorities and private organizations in Zimbabwe. He is a teaching assistant at the University of Zimbabwe in the Department of Architecture and Real Estate. Brilliant's paper this morning is entitled Urban Design and Public Transport in the Age of Pandemics in Harare, Zimbabwe.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So my presentation will focus on the impact of COVID-19, with a specific focus on transportation and urban design. So Zimbabwe, like any other country, has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, having recorded 17,194 cases and 418 people dying. COVID-19 has also led to other aspects like the lockdown of every activity, leading to informal markets being closed down due to this pandemic. This includes the economy generally, because Zimbabwe's economy is around 80% informal, and with it, the informal transportation system. During this time, 72% of Zimbabwe's population has also lost its jobs and now living under the poverty line. And because of this, you look at Harare, how it was planned. It was planned following the separatist planning ideologies by the colonial masters, which led to the development of single-use zones that were meant to separate blacks from whites and various other uses. So the development and the planning of these settlements following these single-use zones, it's led to the development of urban sprawl. Because when the cities, when Harare was planned, it was planned for a population that was controlled, which was around 300,000. But the coming of independence meant that population would bulge, and to date, Harare is around 1.4 million people in terms of, that's according to the Zimbabwe statistics 2012. So as Harare was growing in terms of population, it started expanding its boundaries continuously. And this happened against a situation where Harare in Zimbabwe in general is a single transport option. The other option that exists, the railway transport option, but it's already dead, so it cannot really be considered in terms of transportation in Zimbabwe. On the other hand, the government has been trying to emphasize on the concept of densification, with their recommendation master plan emphasizing on densification, but not giving a straight position as to how to densify. So this whole idea of urban sprawl has been backed by informal transportation system, which came in around 1992 when the Economic Structure Adjustment programs recommended that the government should stop funding the formal transportation system that existed by then. So the coming of COVID and the banning of the informal transport system from moving led to the reintroduction of ZUPCO. But the informal transport network is also continued to masquerade within the cities. If you look to your right, there is a combi that is really guarded by, I don't know what those are, but it really is a fortress that is guarded against the Zimbabwe Republic Police, because they are now violating the COVID rules. The idea of violating the COVID rules now comes from the issue that there is insufficient public transport, because the coming of ZUPCO was a makeshift decision that was made because the government was trying to stop informality, at the same time trying to create an option for people. So this did not take into cognizance the existence of insufficient transport network. So if you look at that, that's the central business district of Harare. The bus terminal is called Copacabana, where the people are always in large queues, and not being able to maintain the social distancing, thereby increasing the chance of one contracting COVID-19. At the same time, the issue of informal public transport system that we have shown in the previous slide is also led to a cat and mouse relationship between the police, thereby leading to some fatalities. For example, people dying. If you look at the right, there's a case where the police are accused of hitting a very young baby at an informal transport rank. So in conclusion, what we're saying is that the design standards in Zimbabwe have reduced the diversity in terms of transport options, whereby you do not have much options with regards to the transport options. Furthermore, the planning policies that were designed are still that are used to design, or that were used in Harare, are still under enforcement. As such, you see that the policy frameworks still operate under the colonial ideology of separatism. As such, the single-use zones are continuing to be delivered in Zimbabwe. This now Harare now needs a set of planning standards that can add transportation options. When one is coming up with a development proposal, one should be able to provide various options without really depending on the road network, which is not really supported by any funding at the moment. Furthermore, the idea of densification that was brought as an option really needs to be placed as part of regeneration in the areas around Harare. For example, in the single-use zone where we have, for example, a commercial center, where we have a central business district of Harare, there are a huge number of weight levels, but these cannot be added into residential or any other use to reduce the rate of sprawl, because the existing policy framework do not permit for the continuous changing of the uses. As such, there is need for the concept of densification to be engraved into the idea of regeneration in Harare, thereby reducing the rate at which the cities are sprawling, and now adding various other uses in different places. For example, we have a component of residential within a central business district, where you say maybe at the 3rd floor we now have a residential up to the 9th floor, or we have some component of residential within industrial, where we create an industrial park, but then you choose the various other uses that are compatible, or use industrial uses that are not very dangerous to the people. So basically, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, brilliant. Our third speaker is Robinson Mikhail, who is an art history student at Johannes Gutenberg University and works as a construction manager at the architectural firm for Senkrick and Mans, Germany. He obtained a bachelor's degree in architectural heritage at the University of Applied Sciences, Rhein-Main in Wiesbaden, Germany. He is mainly concerned with the preservation and development of cultural heritage and modern and contemporary architecture. Robinson's paper today is entitled Envisioning a Post-COVID Hybrid Work Housing Solution in an Architectural Studio in Berlin, Germany.
At the beginning of the crisis, the German government adopted various hygiene measures, including teleworking, homeschooling, and social distancing to reduce the risk of infections in Germany. Digitalization is driving the trend towards working from home. The result of these measures is that people spend significantly more time at home and leave their apartments less frequently. This means that people perceive the surroundings differently, so the rooms and areas in their apartments are redefined. When several people live in one apartment and work there at the same time, various problems arise. There is no private retreat for the individual, therefore it is difficult to work calmly and concentrated. In addition, common areas such as the kitchen and the living room are not designed for this situation. Bringing work into people's homes presupposes a new usage requirement. On the one hand, working, housing, and leisure cannot be separated anymore. Instead of big offices and small apartments, bigger apartments need built to ensure enough space for all utilization units. On the other hand, the room structure inside the apartments must be reconsidered. A bed that is not used 16 hours a day doesn't need an own room. Otherwise, the kitchen, the center of living together, and other common rooms need to be redesigned. But architecture slept through this problem in the past few years. A hybrid solution of working and housing is Arc Plus space in Berlin, Germany. Open floor plans and open room configurations enable the union of living and working on only 250 square meters. Arc Plus is an architecture magazine whose publisher is based in Berlin. The Arc Plus space has an almost square floor plan. This in turn is divided into 9 rectangular rooms of almost the same size, so that a 3x3 grid is created. The walls are partially movable, and each room has at least 2 entrances. This principle enables flexible organization of the rooms, and individual areas can be temporarily separated or switched on. In this way, private, work, and public space can be accommodated in one and the same apartment and can be enlarged or reduced in case it is needed. The old principle of modern architecture that working and living must be strictly separated from each other is overcome. Arc Plus has developed an alternative form of housing and working in cooperation with Arno Löbbecke. This project was realized and opened in 2018. This solution has numerous advantages. Firstly, the valuable living space is used with maximum efficiency. Secondly, unnecessary mobility is avoided due to the elimination of commuting, which improves the environmental balance of both residents and the city. Thirdly, this solution enables a better work-life balance. Long commutes are no longer necessary, and more flexible working hours enrich family life. The Arc Plus space is an office of 10 employees, an event location, and a family's habitation at the same time. That means a family lives there, but during the day, residential use is reduced, and some of the private spaces change their use and become a workspace or a private public space. The blending of work and home in a single unit is special and innovative about this concept. Also, furniture can disappear into the walls or fulfill several functions. For example, a bed can be folded into the wall, so the bedroom can also be used as a place of retreat or a music room during the day. After COVID, larger events can also take place in the apartment. Several rooms can be interconnected for this purpose. The concept offers the possibility of social distancing as well, as certain rooms can be isolated, so it is possible to separate individuals from each other. Arc Plus space has not developed because of COVID, rather it tries to solve general problems of our time. But the pandemic has accelerated these developments and revealed the urgency of measures like these. Arc Plus space unites community and privacy and offers the opportunity to bring working and housing together efficiently and sustainably in an overall solution. The combination of open rooms and modular furniture make the design unique. This concept can also be transferred to other utilizations. For example, a family living in a small apartment. In this case, bedrooms can be transformed into offices by day, and common spaces like the kitchen or the dining room can be interconnected or varied in their size. That makes it easier to combine family and work, and the residents save resources and money. Making ideas like this suitable for the masses and developing them further will be one of the major tasks of the architecture firms of the future. Only in this way, living in the city will become sustainable and affordable, and only in this way, cities will be crisis-proof. Thank you for the attention. At the beginning of
Thank you, Robinson. In our final paper, we have 3 authors. Babak Mamariam is Director of Exposure Control Technologies Research at CPWR, the Center for Construction Research in Maryland, USA. He earned a PhD in construction management from Arizona State University in the US. He is also a certified safety professional, or CSP. His research interest involves occupational safety and health with a focus on site safety, climate improvement, prevention thorough design, and pre-task planning. His co-author, Sarah Brooks, is an industrial hygienist at CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training. She obtained a master's in public health with a concentration in environmental occupational health from the University of Pittsburgh in USA. She currently manages an online database of occupational exposure measurements. The paper by Babak Mariam, Sarah Brooks, and Christopher Lee is entitled Sustaining Safe Construction Operations in the US During COVID-19.
In occupational safety and health, the first step in preventing accidents and injuries is to identify hazards and then assess their magnitude and potential impacts. Whether they are fall hazards, struck by tools or vehicles, trip, slip, or anything else. Once the hazard is identified and assessed, using the hierarchy of controls, we decide how to address the situation. As shown on this slide, the priority is always given to the physical elimination of the hazard. At this step, architects and structural engineers in collaboration with construction practitioners can play a critical role to produce alternative designs to eliminate or minimize the exposure to hazards. If hazard elimination is not feasible, then we consider other options. However, it should be noted that personal protective equipment known as PPE is considered as the last line of defense in preventing work-related accidents and injuries. This study is part of a larger CPWR project that focuses on pre-task planning in construction. In construction projects, pre-task planning is a major step where contractors try to allocate resources needed to successfully deliver each portion of the work. Identifying and addressing safety hazards and providing necessary resources to protect workers is also an important step in pre-task planning. So in this study, we try to explore contractor challenges and preventive practices they employ to sustain construction operations while keeping workers safe during the COVID-19 pandemic in the US. To this end, we conducted 23 video and phone interviews with construction practitioners representing 18 companies in the US. These companies range from small local subcontractors to large level general contractors. We grouped our findings into two major categories: challenges and preventive practices. Constantly changing and sometimes vague guidelines and protocols during the pandemic have been a major challenge for essential industries like construction, which are supposed to continue their operations during the pandemic. Here are a few challenges to name based on our findings. On construction job sites, there are usually more than one contractor working on the same project or same area. We found that there have been disagreements and inconsistency between contractors in applying preventive practices as they use different approaches. Also, contractors have to follow different protocols when they work on different types of projects. For instance, safety and health measures that they have to follow on healthcare projects like hospitals are different compared to a commercial building project. More challenging is that some COVID guidelines contradict with existing occupational safety practices and standards. A simple example is 6-foot distancing. Based on existing safety standards, workers are not allowed to do heavy lifts by themselves. But at the same time, they have to follow 6-foot social distancing rule. Therefore, they do it individually, which raises other health and safety risks. Productivity loss due to lack of workforce as the result of quarantine and infected workforce is another issue. Moreover, the material supply from epicenters for some special items has significantly slowed down or completely stopped some construction operations. To overcome this unforeseen situation and continue operations, contractors have employed some interventions and preventive measures. So let's look at some of these preventive practices we learned in our study. Using a smaller work crews, for example, 2 crews of 5 workers instead of a big crew of 10, and staggering launch times and break times have been some effective control measures to reduce workers' exposure and the spread of virus. Enhancing job hazard analysis documents that are used before starting each task with new line items for COVID-19 to repeatedly inform workers about the hazard and available controls is another effective approach. Also, using electronic forms instead of paper copies and pictures instead of signatures to reduce touch are some other good practices. In addition to basic site sanitation measures like installing additional hand washing stations, some contractors have removed high-touch surfaces like job site turnstile, which has been a pretty clever idea. Carpooling to job site is a very common practice among construction workers, which is not recommended during the pandemic. So as a financial incentive, some contractors have offered per diems to encourage workers to avoid carpooling. And to enhance situational awareness on job sites, posting signage and banners in high traffic areas has been strongly recommended. As we have learned, due to the nature of construction projects, construction workers are constantly at high risk of exposure to several safety and health hazards. And situations like COVID-19 increase these workers' vulnerability. Therefore, it is critical to implement effective safety and health controls to protect these workers to continue essential construction operations. And also at the organizational level, the success of production systems depends on their resiliency in coping with unexpected circumstances like COVID. We believe these transdisciplinary practices that I briefly presented today are not only applicable to construction, but also across multiple industries and sectors with some modifications and adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you, Babak, and to your co-authors. And thank you to all the presenters for their thoughtful papers on the role of design and intervention. The coronavirus pandemic has changed everything. The scale of its impact on the world, from public health to the global economy, on media and society, is indisputable, and not the least of which is the impact on the built environment. In the past 10 months, almost everyone has to some degree become more aware of their physical surroundings, from our cities and streets to our bedrooms and closets. We have all become more attuned to how the spaces we inhabit can serve as both a refuge and a threat, as a part of a system of control and one of liberation. This conference has brought those of us who study, shape, and occupy the built environment together for 2 days to consider the current challenges and future strategies. As architects and historians, urban planners and construction managers, city dwellers and public citizens, we must reevaluate what we do and explore what it means to design for a world forever altered in a way that we cannot yet fully grasp. The 4 papers in this morning's session on design and intervention address this challenge from a wide variety of perspectives, but all with a focus on taking action. They investigate what it means not to just identify the immense challenges that face us in terms of the study and practice of urban planning and architecture, but to propose ways to move forward with optimism and energy. This is not the first, nor will it be the last time cities and buildings have had to be reimagined in response to a crisis that seems infinite in its duration and immeasurable in its scale. The panelists this morning have addressed the question of how not simply to just respond, but to lead by making plans and proposals, by building and intervening in a tangible way that can shape the future of the built environment for the better. Our panelists today have approached this question from a variety of perspectives. In her paper, Elizabeth Ward examines how this crisis has highlighted entrenched inequalities within the workplace of the architectural studio in the UK in relation to gender, class, and race. She notes that this time of turbulence offers an opportunity to upend established elitist practices that have privileged white male architects. The future of the architectural profession, she argues, is in its ability to be flexible and versatile, both in methods of practice and in more sustainable designs, from contactless bathrooms to innovative live-work solutions. In his paper, Robinson Mikhail argues that new restrictions caused by COVID and trends towards digitization provide an opportunity to innovate. He examines the case study of Arc Plus Space, a cooperative project in Berlin of 2018 that is designed to provide equitable and efficient spaces that can respond to blurring divisions between work and life. Robinson notes that the flexibility of this cooperative space to adapt to current needs of its residents for private and communal space have also had an impact on the city itself by helping to forge community and eliminating commuting. The impact of the pandemic on urban transportation is the focus of brilliant Mavami's paper. He connects the crisis of the shortage of public transportation in this largest city in the country of Zimbabwe to the legacy of segregation and colonialist urban planning practices. The government ban on privately owned buses has exacerbated overcrowding at bus terminuses, exposing commuters to potential contagion and to violent clashes with police. He argues that only with improved planning standards that link multiple transportation options with urban densification and multi-use zoning will improve public safety. Improving occupational health and safety is the focus of the paper by Babak Mariam and his co-authors. The authors surveyed a random selection, a range of construction firms to identify current practices to protect the health of construction workers who are a highly vulnerable and essential workforce. They call for a transdisciplinary approach to produce designs that can eliminate and minimize exposure to hazards, physical and social, and include management organization policies to educate crew members. Again, connecting back to the issue of transportation for essential workers in the post-COVID city. I would like to invite the panelists now to unmute and show their video so we can respond to the questions from the audience. Thank you so much, everyone. So our first question comes for Mavima, for Brilliant, my apologies. Good morning, Brilliant. The question that I'd like to share with everyone is about, ask you that after lessons of coronavirus crises, authorities of Harare and other cities in Zimbabwe beginning to think about the possibility of total reform of public transport, with addition of new options such as underground train, e-buses, trams, and other new forms of urban transport to improve a functional quality of urban public transport in cities and towns of Zimbabwe.
Good morning, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Local authorities have been looking for options really to deal with public transportation, but you know it comes with huge amounts of investment to be able to implement such projects. So the issue that we have now in Zimbabwe is that while the government has tried to introduce a small train that runs within the city, and the idea of having cable cars coming, it has all been influenced by the political as well as the economic situation in Zimbabwe, whereby you find politicians overriding certain decisions from the technocrats and other people. So ultimately, you see that while the options are really they are there, and of course we have not exhausted them all, but while they are there, it's almost impossible to implement them in Zimbabwe at the moment.
I was wondering too, and I actually would like to open up this question to Babak as well too, as that both your papers really made me think about, remind us that all workers do not have the privilege that many of us do to stay at home and work from home. And I wonder, Brilliant, you mentioned, what does these infrastructural systems, what would a post-COVID transportation system look like for the residents of Harare? One that would provide safe and affordable public transport for workers. And I'm thinking in terms of, even the design of bus stops. And, I think your papers really got at the idea of the larger urban planning changes that have to be made. And the question could also be extended to construction sites. If we think of bus stops and construction sites as these sites within the city, how does one design a safe construction site? This is something I think often as architects, I know we feel like our responsibility ends somehow at passing off the project to the builders. So I wonder if you both had any thoughts about that.
Oh, who is responding first?
I can go first. Thanks for the question and for having us today. Talking about construction job sites and the layout of the construction job sites, obviously it's totally different. When it comes to larger construction sites like power plants, refineries, and also heavy civil. Me and my colleagues at CPWR, we have been to the job sites over the past several years that there are maybe 4,000, 5,000 workers on the same job site. And it is like a little town. And then we see bus stops, we see the train track, and exactly like a small town. So, and to regulate these job sites, we have a long way, really long way. And as I mentioned in my presentation, carpooling is a huge issue in construction, especially for large mega projects when we need to mobilize workforce from other states to the project job site. And then workers, sometimes they reside together, they carpool together because they're far from their home states. So that is a huge challenge these days. And some financial incentives definitely required. And then we need some support from contractors, from project owners. And also, as I mentioned in my presentation, some contractors came up with this idea of staggering the time, the launch time, the break time, because throughout the shift in construction, we see multiple break times, so we cannot have all the workers take the break at the same time. So these are some practices that contractors are trying to employ to minimize this spread, but it is not an absolute answer.
Okay, so it's now my turn, right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brilliant.
Okay. Yes, I think in the context of planning and deciding of bus terminus in Zimbabwe, or generally anyone can apply it anyway. I think in my case, or in my understanding, the issue is not much about how these have been designed, particularly with regards to space and allocation, but it's more of that artificial congestion that happens because the city now operates between 9 o'clock because of the lockdown, operates between 9 o'clock and 8 o'clock. So everyone has to be everywhere at the moment. So you find that the reasons why there are these long queues and people are congesting at the small bus stops is because the government is not provided, or they've removed the private owned transportation systems and provided people with public owned buses, with public sector buses, but there are very few. So you find that for a trip to maybe one location from, say, a location in Harare from the CBD, you find that for people to go there, they need maybe with 5 buses, they would take 2 trips, but because the government has provided one, they have to wait for like 10 trips to come. So you find people are crowded at the same place at the same time. So you find in terms of the actual design, you can't really say this is not properly designed.
Mm.
Yes. So I think it's more about converting the city into more of a 24-hour city than that artificial congestion where you have timed movements where you say you have to be there by this period of time and leave there by this time. Yes.
Yes, you mentioned that. That's a really interesting point about schedule as well too. Just the sort of life of the city, the time in which workers need to be places that, drives that. I'm disappointed, as architects, we always think that we can correct everything through design, but of the architecture. But I understand what you're saying, which is a really good point. Thank you very much to Brilliant and Babak. I'd also like to convey another question from our audience to Robinson about, and then extend it perhaps to include Elizabeth. The question, Robinson, is how do you think this very interesting homework concept could translate in different cultural contexts where concepts of privacy and personal space vary considerably? And this is such an excellent question because Elizabeth, you showed 95 Peckham Road as one of your examples. And it made me think of, yes, what does a post-COVID live-work project look like? And it's very interesting in light of that question to think about similarities and differences between the Arc Plus space project and also of 95 Peckham Road. Perhaps Robinson, you might start.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think the work housing concept of Arc Plus can be transferred to several societies with different requirements, whether the working space is a shop or an office or whatever. And I could also imagine to combine multiple households that share a working space during the day, and at night the place is separated into 2 or more independent units. But I guess I focused on comparable situations in Germany or in Western countries and something like that that can be compared to the situation in Berlin I described. So I didn't focus in detail in other cultures like in African or Asian countries that have, of course, different problems than in Europe or in the US.
Yeah, and what I found was interesting about the Arc Plus space project. So Arc Plus is am I correct? It's a magazine or a journal.
That's right. It's an architecture magazine, but the CEO of Arc Plus, it's Arnlin Go. He's also an architect, and he also worked with the architect Anna Löbeke on the design of this space.
And so that was for their offices, was it not?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an amazing kind of, that you would go to work for the magazine and then have a whole living work situation, which is kind of remarkable. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Elizabeth.
Yeah. So 95 Peckham Road is in London, where there's a shortage of space anyway. And it's by Peter Barber Architects. It was designed in 2020 and was applauded because it is multiple flats. They describe it as a tenement style housing. I can't remember how many units are in it, but the idea is that everybody in the tenement building has a space to use as leisure, but that space is an outside space. So they might have a balcony, or there's some communal courtyards. They might have a private garden space on the ground floor. And then their work area is their living space. But I mean, space is at a premium in London where that is. So I guess, you know, they're making the best they can of the site. It came last year, but it was built last year, but it actually was designed pre-COVID. So the things that I alluded to in my paper in terms of, I disagree with Robinson, because he talked about open plan living, and in the UK, actually open plan living is, going, because people are finding when they have to self-isolate within their family unit, they need to have space to do that. And so open plan living is, they just can't do it. People are being shut up in their bedrooms, and it's quite difficult. So we're thinking that with new design here, that the new houses will be a series of spaces rather than a big open plan space and then, utility areas.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, because I was reading different approaches as well too, as to what there's been this idea of the open plan as, something we've inherited from modernism, and now does that really work, in our current situation? Another really excellent question, Elizabeth, this is probably a good one for you. The practice of architecture has been much dependent on social networks to get work. How will those that are not part of these networks create their own or become part of the existing?
So I think, actually, to be fair, in the UK, architectural practices, if you're a small practice, you're a bit behind on the social revolution, and you're not necessarily in social media anyway. A lot of work comes through word of mouth, and there is quite a lot of online networking and business clubs available that you can join, you can be part of, you can pay a subscription to. In fact, most of those online network clubs are crying out for architect members to be part of them. And I belong to one, and we have a meeting at 06:45 a.m. so that the business of the network is over before the day begins. And that's really good. And I work with it part-time in a practice, and I get a lot of work through that. Another easy way to get work is to talk to your clients and to get them to refer repeat business to you, or to get them to, they know what your work is like, and they can tell their colleagues and their clients. So you can, even if they themselves have a one-off extension or a house, they might know someone who wants work. And then finally, I would say contribute back into the profession. So we have a thing that's just started up called the Architecture Social, in which I'm a participant member, and because I'm active in that arena, it's not social networking, it's just like another platform. I'm active in that arena, and I'm getting quite a lot of queries, and people saying, can you help with this, can you do this? And I think it as much as you can put in is good.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. As you're arguing that, if we see this as an opportunity to dismantle, some of these structures that existed. So when you were talking about the ward system, like this idea of, you're absolutely right. Are there different ways that, and I think the question is brilliant, that, architects urban planners can get work rather than, relying on these sort of traditional recognition systems, kind of like, the Academy Awards, and Hollywood film has now been dismantled by new forms of social media. So as you're pointing out, it's the exact same issue in terms of architecture as this sort of, celebrity profession. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that we were very tight on time for the presentation, and I actually had a line in there, and then I took it out, which was that Frank Gehry is too busy looking after himself to avoid catching COVID than sitting at the drawing board and designing new projects. And he's classified as a star architect. So I really think that just architecture, those white male men are on the decline now, almost.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think that we can argue, that a huge shift like this, a huge change, this becomes, we can turn it into something positive and turn it into an opportunity to actually, as you argued, really re-examine the future of practice, not just in terms of the methods, but in terms of what our aims are. And it looks like we have just 1 minute left. So I rather than starting another question, I would like to thank the panelists very much for their papers and their energy and provocative thoughts, and to thank the organizers, Caitlin and Mohammed, and to the audience for watching us today. So thank you, everyone.